Last video, we saw that we could install hypervisor software to let us run multiple virtual machine instances on a single physical machine. And we talked about two different types of hypervisor software. Just as a quick review, we had type 1 and type 2 hypervisor software. The difference was type 1 hypervisor software ran directly on the underlying physical server's hardware, while type 2 hypervisor software ran on an underlying operating system, such as Microsoft Windows, and then the VM would be installed on top of that hypervisor. And that VM would contain its own operating system itself, the guest OS, maybe Linux, maybe Microsoft Windows, maybe something else. All the supporting files and the configuration would be part of that virtual machine instance and the applications that we're going to be running. And oftentimes when we think of a VM, a virtual machine, we think of a server, something that's going to hold files on a hard drive. But we don't have to have just a virtual server. We could have something like a virtual router. We could literally virtualize a Cisco router inside of a VM, or maybe a virtual switch. And we're going to take a look later in this video at a few examples. But before we do that, let's define another term that you hear a lot in the industry, and that term is containers. A container is made up of a specific application and all the supporting files, all the libraries, all the configuration files required for that application. But it works a little bit different than a VM. With a container, we still have the physical server, we still have the host operating system, just like a type 2 hypervisor, but then we have something called a container engine. And the container engine is going to be used to create a container image. And the most popular container engine out there these days is Docker. And the container image is going to contain a copy of all the resources required by an application. It's going to have the configuration files, the libraries, all the support files, and the application itself. But here's the big difference. We don't have to install the underlying operating system as part of the container. We're going to rely on that server's operating system. So it makes it much more portable, much more lightweight. And then the container engine is going to run the container image. And again, the big term you might hear around containers is that it's a lightweight VM, because unlike a VM which has its own operating system, a container does not. But getting back to our discussion of VMs, we said that a VM is not necessarily a server. It might be some other virtualized device. Let's say that we want to install some virtual devices in our cloud provider's environment. Maybe we have some virtual servers where we have our files stored in the cloud, but for security purposes, we'd love to have a firewall sitting in front of those. Now, it's unlikely that the cloud provider is going to be okay with us walking in their front door with a firewall under our arm and install it in their data center. But what we can do is we can install a virtual firewall. We can install a virtual machine and then run something like the AS. I can specify the hardware. And this could vary widely with your requirements for whatever server you're installing. But let's say that I want a couple of CPUs. I'll change the unit of measure to gigabytes here. And I'll say that I want 16 gigabytes, and I want a 160 gigabyte hard drive, and I want my network adapter connected to a particular port group. Now, in our next video, I'm going to show you how to configure a port group. A port group is essentially how we're connecting this server into a virtual switch to get out to other devices. And let's say that I've got a port group called PG for port group, BR1, SW1. So we'll select that as our port group. Now, when I boot this up, I actually want to boot on what is essentially a DVD to do the installation of my software. And I have an ISO image of that DVD. So I can say for my CD DVD drive, I want to select not a host device, but a data store ISO file. This is a file that I've already uploaded to our storage area. I've uploaded it to our data store. And let's say it's going to be this CSR 1000V router. I'll select that and I'll say next. And if everything looks good, I'll say finish and I'll complete the installation. Now, I'm not going to take the time to do that here, but when I would click finish, it would fire up this virtual machine and it would boot off that ISO image that I provided, and it would walk me through the installation. And of course, the way that looks would vary depending on what you're installing. But that's an overview of how we can install a virtual machine and look at a few different options for virtual machines. They're not just servers, they can be network appliances as well.